And thank you for making time to join us on this webinar. So today we will be discussing the federal Clean School Bus Rebate Program. The Clean School Bus Program in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law provides an unprecedented $5 billion with a B funding to update our school bus fleets. Effective and efficient implementation of electric school buses to a fleet require close coordination between a school district and their local electric utility. So this webinar is a partnership between the Region 4 Office of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. And it is designed for school districts and for electric utility providers to learn more about the EPA Clean School Bus Rebate Program, including the application process itself. Our speakers are going to discuss how to work together to successfully add electric school buses to a fleet. And then you'll hear some practical considerations for adding charging stations and then also recharging considerations. So I am Dory Larson. I'm the Electric Transportation Program Manager with the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, or SACE. And if you're not familiar with us, SACE has been a regional leader advocating for equitable and responsible energy choices in the Southeast for over 35 years. And our electric transportation work leverages our in-house research, advocacy, and education and outreach with the focus on accelerating the equitable transition to electric transportation. So a little bit of housekeeping. Please ask your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end of the presentations. Also, our presenters have graciously made their slides available, so they will be emailed to participants after the webinar, along with a link to this recording. So we are going to hear first from Dale Aspey of the Region 4 Office of the Environmental Protection Agency to talk to us about the Clean School Bus Program, and then from Westy Westmoreland, the Director of Electrification with Dominion Energy South Carolina, about practical considerations for the infrastructure. So now it is my pleasure to pass it over and introduce our presenters. Mr. Dale Aspey has been employed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. EPA, since 1986, and has focused on mobile source emissions since 1988. Beyond regulatory programs, he has been involved with innovative strategies to reduce mobile source emissions since 1991. He is very interested in building partnerships and establishing cooperation between people in order to serve problems and reduce emissions. He's also very interested in the emerging technologies in many different fields that are converging to reduce diesel emissions and improve our energy situation while helping the public. So he's going to go through his slides first, but I'd also like to introduce Mr. Westy Westmoreland, who has been with Dominion Energy South Carolina, formerly SCE&G, for 31 years, and is currently the Director of Electrification. He has a mechanical engineering degree from Clemson University and resides in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. In his current role, he is developing programs and supporting customer efforts to electrify transportation, especially on-road electric vehicles. And his goal is to support the rapid transition from internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles with timely electric utility infrastructure deployment, strategic programs, and excellent customer service. Current priorities include both South Carolina electric bus and the CARTA electric transit bus deployments. So thank you both for joining us today and sharing your expertise. I will hand it over to Mr. Dale Aspey. Let me go ahead and get your slides up. Give me just a second to transition those.
Thank you, Dory, for that. Appreciate it. My school bus story is, I guess I'm of the age where they had not invented school buses yet. So we rode dinosaurs to school. But what I'd like to do today is talk to you all about this incredible program, the Clean School Bus Program that's been authorized through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It is an absolutely phenomenal program. And as Dory mentioned earlier, this program, to me, is a great example of partnership and the need to partner with different groups. you're attending this webinar, so you're interested in electric school buses. And I think the need is paramount to work with your local utility, and Westy is going to talk more about that. Also, partner with your vendor, partner with your electric vehicle charging infrastructure provider. So there's a lot of partnerships that need to take place with this. So, Dory, next slide, please. There you go. As was mentioned earlier, this program provides for $5 billion, that's with a B, $5 billion over a 5-year program to replace existing buses with clean electric, propane, and CNG, compressed natural gas buses. The idea here is, of course, to reduce emissions, reduce greenhouse gases, provide better air quality for our kids and for the neighbors, for the areas around bus stops. My daughter went to school and the bus stop was about 30 feet from our house, and I knew when the bus was coming. I could smell it. So this is going to really help clean up the air. Also provides a great opportunity for school districts to upgrade their buses to new technology. Next slide, please. There's 2 funding pools provided for this Clean School Bus program. The first funding pool is for zero emission buses, and just think electric buses for that, battery electric buses. The other funding pool, as I mentioned, is for propane, for CNG, compressed natural gas, for also zero emission buses, again, battery electric buses, or a combination of those. So funding pool 2 can be any combination of those, whereas the first funding pool, again, is exclusively zero emission buses. A couple of things to note here is that each school district can apply for up to 25 buses. However, you're limited to 1 application. So again, that application though can be for up to 25 buses. Something I have to note is that the deadline is August 19th. Something I'll repeat several times is please do not wait until August 18th to apply. Make sure everything's going through, working successfully, and that the application process is completed. So I advise starting today if you can do that. Next slide, please. We have different funding levels for different priorities, priority districts. What are these priority districts? What we classify as a high priority would be schools that have a 20% or higher poverty level. Another characteristic of a priority district is if it's classified as a rural district. And a third priority would be tribal schools, either directly operated by the tribes, with service provided by the tribes, or funded by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, anything like that. So those are classified as priority district. Other schools not meeting those criteria are non-priority. Why is that important? Well, you can see it on this slide. Buses that are serving the priority district, if you're applying for an electric bus, you can receive up to $375,000 per bus if you're a priority district. Other districts can get up to $250,000. So very significant, huge amounts of money there that will cover most of the cost of an electric bus, if not all. We also are paying, as I mentioned earlier, for compressed natural gas buses and propane buses, although at a funding level, and you can see those amounts here on the slide. I do reference our website. I'll mention this several times, epa.gov/clean school bus. And then go to the school bus rebates page, and it can give you all the information on this program. But large amounts of money. So if you do the math, say you're looking at 10 school buses, what, $3.75 million right there. It's for the electric bus. So it can go a long ways to helping you upgrade your fleet. Next slide, please. So you're interested in the electric bus. Well, how am I going to recharge it? We thought about that. We will pay for charging infrastructure. Again, if you're one of those priority districts, we'll pay up to $20,000 per charging station per bus, or one charging station per bus. The other districts, the non-priority districts, will pay for up to $13,000 per charging station. So, we try and make sure that those buses can be recharged. And this is another example of partnership. And we'll talk about this in a little while, but we need to get that charging infrastructure up and running when you get those buses delivered. You don't want the bus to sit around waiting for the charging station to be installed. Next slide, please. Regarding charging infrastructure, we will pay for everything from the electric panel over to the charging station and of course the bus. However, and that's on the right-hand side of the slide here, we will not pay for anything from the utility side, from the utility network over to the electric meter. But again, we will pay electric panel to the charging station. Okay, next slide, please. This is absolutely paramount. I cannot stress this enough. I very seldom try to read from slides. I'll do my best to paraphrase this, but we see a lot of applicants having trouble with the sam.gov registration. I highly advise you, encourage you, cajole you to please, please, please check your sam.gov registration. An individual account is not the same as the organization's entity registration. So make sure you have that covered. And just in the way of background, sam.gov is the way federal government pays other entities for these grants, rebates, etc. Okay, review your registration information. Make sure that the unique entity identifier is correct, that the points of contact are correct. You may need to add an account. You make sure that it is active if it's been deactivated. Make sure that you can get into it. If you have problems, please contact the service desk at www.fsd, that's Federal Service Desk.gov. There's other websites out there that will help you, but many of those are for pay, whereas this one is a government website and it's free to help you out. Only individuals with email addresses listed as points of contact are eligible for this application process. So make sure, again, that you have it set up as either an electronic business point of contact or the alternate electronic business point of contact. Another choice would be a government business point of contact or alternate government business point of contact. So again, we get many questions on this issue. So make sure that the email account you're using is the same and that is listed in the sam.gov registration. So cannot stress that enough. Next slide, please. I highly encourage you, being interested in this program, to sign up for EPA's Clean School Bus Listserv. They will keep you appraised of upcoming events. go to the Clean School Bus website listed on this page here. There's a fantastic webinar that the recording has just been released. If you go to that website, you'll find on June 8th, there's a webinar that took you step by step through the application process. So it's a very good one. I highly encourage you to view that so you know how to get through the process. And once you clear sam.gov, it's actually an easy process. Also, if there's any questions that you have, please contact us at EPA at the cleanschoolbus@epa.gov website, email account. Cannot emphasize enough, start now. Don't wait until August 18th to get this in. It will close on August 19th. Something I didn't mention before, I should have, was that this is the first year we're doing this. We had to rush it out because of deadlines. This year is a rebate program. Next year may change. It may be a rebate, it may be a grant program. It's still to be determined. So I highly encourage you, if you're interested, apply this year. I think it's a great chance to be selected for funding. Next slide, please. Okay, that's a very fast overview of the Clean School Bus program. Right now, let's talk a little bit about what we're doing as what you all need to consider in implementing a Clean School Bus program. Dory mentioned partnerships, and this is an example of a partnership with another federal agency. We thank our friends at Department of Energy and the National Renewable Energy Lab for working with us on this and providing these slides. They have some great information out there at their own Clean School Bus site. You can see referenced here. So I encourage you to go there if you have technical questions on the school bus itself, on how electric school buses work and considerations for you. Next slide. They also have an excellent video series that gives you a lot of great background information. So again, if you have questions on electric school buses and charging, on the technical side, please reference these websites. And again, thanks to our friends at Department of Energy. Next slide. This, acquiring an electric school bus is a multi-step process. You have to not only, when you're thinking about getting the bus, what bus requirements do I have? And we'll talk about these a little bit. What is my route? What type of bus do I need? Who am I going to use as a vendor? How do I train my staff? These are all questions to be asked. You also have the infrastructure side. Right now, we're all familiar with the fossil fuel infrastructure. You get the diesel fuel and you have your pumps and everything. We're adding a new element here with electric charging stations. So a very key partner in this is the utility, your local utility. You need to work with them very closely, contact them right at the beginning of the process. Need to plan, where am I planning my charging infrastructure? How am I doing that? How am I implementing it? What type of chargers will I have? How is that going to disrupt my flow of vehicles through the yard, the bus yard? When you bring all these pieces together and form those partnerships, you'll have a successful electric school bus implementation project. Next slide, please. These are just some thoughts I had for you all to consider when you're looking at electric school buses and adding them to your fleet. What is my range anxiety? Even though you may not be driving the bus, what is your concern level over how far those buses can go? Relate to that is, how far can they actually go? how big a safety margin do I want on that? A key question is what charging equipment is available? There's a lot of different ones out there. A related one to that is what charging equipment do I actually need? Your needs may not be as high, or it may not be as low as what others need. So you need to consider what, to work with your utility partner and your vendor, school bus vendor, to see what you actually need. Should I use managed charging versus unmanaged? We'll talk about this a little bit. Using software to optimize how you charge and keep your costs down. Question would be, how long does it take to actually have that bus delivered? How long does it take to have that charging station delivered and set up? Will my charging station work with telematics? Many fleets are going to telematics to optimize maximum efficiency for the system. How long do batteries last? And then what about maintenance? These are all factors that I advise you to consider as you're looking to add electric school buses. And we'll talk about these very quickly. Next slide, please. There we go. We're going to talk a little bit about energy versus power. In this context, energy is what the bus needs to complete a route, whereas power is what we need to supply to the bus to recharge the battery. So some considerations for you all to think about regarding what the bus needs is, how far does that bus go? What is my route like? How hilly is it? One advantage of electric school buses, we've heard from other people who've actually used them, is that they have tremendous torque and that they handle mountains better than diesel buses. So, again, what is the terrain like for my route? How much can I use regenerative braking? Is it stop and go, or do I have long distances between stops? What are the environmental impacts? How cold is it? How hot is it? What is my load? Am I carrying 70 students every time, or is it a partial load? So these are all factors to think about, and it may vary route to route, bus to bus. So think about what is optimal for you all. Regarding chargers, there's all types of chargers. We'll talk about these a little bit. One thing to remember that in general, electric vehicles have built-in chargers, meaning they can take AC current and then convert to DC current to be stored in the battery. So again, we'll talk about chargers in just a little bit, but things to consider is, what is my dwell time? How long is a bus in the yard? How long will it take to recharge? Am I recharging buses one at a time, in parallel, in series? How many buses do I have? What are my future plans? What we've heard, people love the electric buses and they want to add more. So how can I add to my capability in the future? So these are all things to be considered. Okay, next slide, please. These are some quick features of electric charging stations and the prices you see. Again, considering the charging, make sure whatever you buy is not overpowered. I use a comparison, overpowered for what the bus can take. Many electric vehicles and buses can take 80 kilowatts or so for power. If you have a charger that's cranking out 350 kilowatt, you're not going to be able to get it all into the bus quickly. I use the analogy of a gas pump that can pump out 100 gallons per hour, whereas the car can only accept 10 gallons per hour. So simply said, make sure the charger is right size for the bus. Next slide, please. Managed charging, again, is using software to look at maximizing and optimizing your charging strategy to reduce cost, to optimize the time, to provide for future updates. Also working with telematics. How is that particular driver doing? How much do they pull down the battery? Basically, what is their electrical fuel efficiency? So just something to think about is looking at managed charging solutions. Next slide, please. Cannot stress this enough, and thanks to Westy for being on this webinar. But working with your utility partner is absolutely paramount. Consult them right at the beginning of the process. Get them out there, talk together. What are my needs? And Westy will go into that. Okay, next slide, please. For a successful implementation of an electric school bus program, these are the various factors to be considered. What is the vehicle? What do I need? What capability do I need? So that involves working with your route planners and your vendor to make sure that you get the right bus for the right application. What is my charging infrastructure need? Working again, utility, again with the bus vendor. What is the best type of electric recharging station I can get? And maybe a mix. I've heard of programs using both a level 2 and a DC fast charger because they have different needs. Working with your utility, we've said that a number of times, very, very important. Do the analysis. What do I need as far as electrical current? Do I need to upgrade my panel? Do I need to run additional lines? So this is a consulting process. Again, working with your utility. Next slide, please. Even how your bus yard is laid out can determine cost. So you want to maximize the efficiency, and that means minimizing the distance from the panel to the charging station. And next slide, please. Just some examples of cost and what it costs to trench. So just be aware of these things. The idea here, of course, is to maximize the effectiveness of the program. And next slide, please. Please contact us again at the national website. Get on that listserv. Here in Region 4, the Southeast United States, my colleagues Alan Powell and Will Carnwright and myself are happy to answer questions. And with that, I turn it over to Westy.
Thank you so much, Dale. Appreciate that. Westy, let me go ahead and switch over my slides to yours.
All right.
All right. Give me just a second.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I'll tell my school bus story. So my first school bus was driven by an 18-year-old at my high school, and he parked the bus at his house and would pick us up. And that was normal for an 18-year-old to drive a school bus back in the day. So just seems crazy today that you would put your child on a school bus driven by an 18-year-old, but that was the way it was.
That is hysterical. I cannot even imagine that. All right, we'll take it away. Wow.
All right. So I cannot see the slides, but I have them up. So which slide are you showing? I can
Your
for some
first
reason.
slide that has your picture and your contact information.
Okay. Well, you've gone through that. So why don't we go to the next slide? So, but very happy to be with y'all today. Westy Westmoreland with Dominion Energy, South Carolina. Very excited about electrification and school buses, electric school buses in general. We have been working in both Virginia and more recently in South Carolina on some projects that are coming up from some previous grant funding or just projects in general. One being a 50 school bus project in Virginia that includes vehicle to grid, or as we call it, V2G technology. So we have actually just recently injected the first energy from those buses into the grid for the first time this summer. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But thank you for the lead in. And I think it's real critical that the utility be engaged early. So I'm kind of glad that's being identified. When we first started doing charging stations for DC fast chargers, it would already be laid out and picked before the utility was involved. A lot of times the cost of getting service there might exceed the cost of the charging stations, but since then everybody has kind of evolved and learned that it's important that the utility be engaged early, because site selection is really important and something that we can definitely assist you with relative to our system. And when I say our, I mean any utility on your system, relative to the site and how to get power to it. I think that the considerations are, if you look at the charging locations that you may want to use, some of them may only have three-phase 208 power. They may, in some cases, only have single-phase power. So generally, at least for the applications that we've seen so far, that we're doing so far for school buses and transit buses, is there have generally been level 3 DC fast charging, and that means that they would run on direct current as opposed to AC current, which is what level 2 and level 1 run on. So, one of the first questions that you ask yourself on a site is three-phase power available? And so that can be a question that the utility can certainly answer for you very quickly. Your site maintenance folks may know that as well. You may already have three-phase service to those locations. So, and then the next, if you have three-phase, then what would be the voltage output that you currently have in the transformer? So is it currently 480 volt output, or is it currently 208 volt output as far as the three-phase? So those are your initial questions. If it's a larger school that you're charging the buses at, then you probably would have 480 volt capacity or 480 volt service to that school or location. And then if you do, then your next question would be, well, what's my capacity in the existing transformer? So we're looking at some sites in South Carolina right now to do some initial bus charging. And they have additional capacity available in the transformer to serve what they need. Now, these are small deployments, right? Like 4 buses. So not a tremendous amount of load, considering if you had a charging depot of 20 buses or 30 buses or something bigger than that. So so those are the questions. And in a lot of cases with larger depot type applications for school buses, you're probably going to have a separate service. So you would have a separate transformer, 480 volt transformer for three-phase availability for those services. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail on the other slides. Going down the list, understanding the construction and installation requirements of the utility. Every utility has their own commercial standards. These can be conduit requirements, transformer pad requirements, a number of things that are involved. Your utility also may have some electric vehicle make-ready programs that are different than what the traditional commercial service would be if you were just serving a building. So those would be the questions to ask as well. Is there some make-ready components that your utility is offering that can help that process? the biggest lead time issue with the supply chain that we're having right now in this space is three-phase transformers. So those 480 volt transformers can take up to a year, sometimes more, to be delivered to us. So if you have a project, you have to keep that in mind, that probably 6 months is at the minimum to a year to get that transformer. So knowing what the transformer size that's needed, the type of transformer is important. And that's a very easy, or I should say easy, that is the very important first thing to look at with the design. If you can identify what the transformer capacity is early on and get that transformer ordered while you're doing other things to get this design completed and the site ready, that's just very important. And it's just related to all the issues that we've seen in the supply chain. But even prior to that, transformers had a fairly significant lead time, but it's just gotten a lot longer with the supply chain challenges that we've all faced recently. Vehicle to grid, which I spoke about earlier, this says V to X because I can also mean vehicle to building. A lot of schools are used as disaster shelters for emergency response. South Carolina, we have a tremendous amount of, or a good number of hurricanes, and the schools are typically used for the larger hurricanes as evacuation areas. So there is a significant potential to use the battery storage as a backup resource in the event of a grid outage that could power after the emergency type situation. So that's a consideration. The other part is the vehicle to grid, which is what we are doing in Virginia. So the school buses, of course, are used during the school year, but they sit a good bit in the summertime. And a lot of times that can be times where the grid is taxed the most. So therefore, we could use that with the grid as an alternative resource to provide grid power, which reduces the need for what we call peaker plants, which are plants that can come online just to meet high summertime or high wintertime peaks. And those could be coal plants or natural gas plants typically that come online. So additional ability for carbon reduction from using battery power to supplement the grid. And then, of course, there's a financial consideration, some value to that you would receive for providing that resource to the grid. So there could be a partnership with the utility on those battery applications and the energy that's injected back into the grid. So that's probably something more for future considerations. There's so much value in electric school buses. Did some quick math today, and based on current rates, 60, 70%, maybe even 80% fuel cost reduction based on current prices. And electric rates, because they're generated from so many different resources, whether it's natural gas or wind or solar, nuclear, hydro, coal, all that mix, it creates a lot of resiliency in pricing as opposed to just having one type of fuel source. Rates and tariffs are important. If you have a pure volumetric rate that you're on, X cost per kilowatt hour, then it doesn't really matter when you charge. But many times you're going to have tiered rates to where off-peak charging, you get a cost advantage, and on-peak charging, it's significantly more expensive. So one of the real advantages of electric school buses and electrification in general is you have some flexibility on charging. So you may be able to wait to start your charging at 9 p.m. on a summer or towards the evening, even in the winter as well, and be able to charge before the peak times come about. And that can save you significantly 50% or more on the electric rates by managing that charging. There's a number of companies out there that provide these managed charging type services that you can engage, and the utilities can help support you with that as well. That can help make that whole process with software easy to where you just have to plug in and then the software handles the rest and make sure you're fully charged in the morning. But you also optimize your electric consumption. So you're paying the minimum amount for the electrical energy, but still meeting your operational needs. So, and then, and that's kind of what we categorize as other advisory services, getting power to the site transformers. Do we need to look at a loop type service for resiliency for larger depot applications? So next slide, please. So this is just kind of a quick picture of the project that we've done. It just kind of gives you an idea what the design looks like for a school. You just kind of have the aerial, and then on the lower screen you just have the buses. So they kind of lined up, and that's where they would charge. They pull in, plug in, pull in, and plug in, and charge. So next slide. So this is just a little bit of engineering detail. It's kind of boilerplate, and this is just one provider, which is Proterra, which is the one that we selected in Virginia to use. So you have a power control dispenser, which is the box, power control unit, which is the larger box up above. And you can kind of see the dimensions on that, which is 2 by 3 by I guess roughly 6.5 feet tall. So, and you would have one of those for between 2 and 4 dispensers, and then each dispenser would serve a bus charging, and these charge at a 60 kW rate. So if this is a DC fast charger level 3, works on 480 volt power. So if you look at a bus that's 200 to 250 kilowatt hour battery, you have a charging curve, so you can't do direct math, but you could probably look at from a low charge, let's say it's 10% to 90%, probably in a 4-hour, 3-4 hour time period. So of course you can get those exact numbers from the different bus providers. So Proterra does offer a V to G option with their equipment. So instead of the energy going from the grid to the bus, during a vehicle to grid deployment, the energy would go from the bus back through the dispenser and back through the power unit, and then go to the grid as a grid supply opportunity. So just a way to produce additional resiliency to the grid, and reduce the carbon output compared to, as I mentioned before, separate peaking generation. So future opportunity down the line to help offset these costs as you evaluate your different projects. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit more of a detail of kind of where the buses park, where your dispensers are, which are the green circles, and then where your power boxes are. So, and then where the CT cabinet and the panel are. So if you kind of see the green rectangle towards the top, so that says Dominion transformer. So that would be your 480 volt transformer. That might be a 1,000 kVA transformer, it might be a 1,500, depends on the size of the deployment. It could be something smaller. And then that power would flow to your CT cabinet and panel. And CT is just an expression for a type of metering. So it's rings that go around the conductors that measure the amount of energy that go into it. And then of course your electrical panel. And then as was mentioned in the previously, is that's kind of your dividing point between the funding on the IIJA. So once you go from the meter itself and then go to a breaker panel, that's the dividing line between what the IIJA would fund under the school bus program. But the 4 kind of light bluish boxes, those are the power cabinets that I showed in the previous slide. And of course, those would be covered as part of that $13,000 or $20,000 charging funding, as well as the dispensers. So So I guess if you would do the math, and this was I guess a priority one school, and you had, looks like in this picture, we're showing 8 school buses, so 8 times 20 is 160,000. You can change the math for 13,000, but that 160,000 would cover the blue squares, the green circles, and part of that red square, or at least a panel component of that. So next slide, please. So this is another project in South Carolina that we're actually working on right now. So this shows a line extension. So this is why engaging the utility early is important, because we have to design and do project analysis on the tap. In this case, what you're seeing is the red lines to the left, and it has a box pointing to it. It says existing DESC 3-phase line. DESC just stands for Dominion Energy South Carolina. So that's the existing infrastructure. But where they want to charge does not have 3-phase service available at that exact building. So we need to extend an overhead line, which is shown in the green. And then the blue circles on that line would be pole locations where that line would be attached to. So this would be an overhead line extension. In many cases, it could be an underground line extension to a pad mounted transformer as well. This is just a 1-bus installation. So we would probably be able to utilize a pole mounted transformer just because of the size of this initial installation. But we anticipate that we'll have a lot more electric buses at this location. And this will give us the ability to put a pad mounted transformer later and serve it off of this new green 3-phase line extension at the site. So, and of course, the utility will work with the school district to determine routes and where they want to serve and how it makes sense. But this just to emphasizes the importance of site selection and then how we can assist in that process. Because if you can imagine, the site was further in the back of the property or much further away, that just adds to the difficulty and the cost of getting service to that location that may be picked. So optimizing location is important. So I think that concludes the slides that I have. As I mentioned before, very excited about the opportunity with electric school buses. Tremendous cost savings from a fuel standpoint, budgeting stability on cost, grant funding available is fantastic, and that it includes the charger as well. So that's been the biggest hurdle, is just the cost difference between buses, between a diesel bus and an electric school bus. Zero emissions, so the bus line would no longer be loaded with fumes anymore. So you'd be able to have clean, zero emission buses related to that. So that's an exciting piece of it as well. And then what we've seen on the transit side is the maintenance is about 50 cents on the dollar for electric transit buses versus their diesel counterparts. So I think that'll equate over to school buses as well. So just a tremendous amount of positives, lots of excitement for the future and the future of school buses and supporting the grid and supporting our children. So just a great time to be working in this space. So, but thank you for the opportunity to talk, and I hope that might be helpful. So.
Thank you so much, Westy, and thank you so much to Dale. Really appreciate the insights that you provided. If you don't mind, we're going to go to some questions that came up. If you have questions, please reminder to put them in the Q&A. The first question comes from Karen Friedman, and she asks if our school district has already submitted an application, but for propane buses, and now they've decided they want electric buses, can we modify our application?
I'm going to tentatively say yes, but Alan Powell, my co-worker, is on the site on the webinar, And I believe the answer is yes, correct, Alan?
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. We're pretty confident that we can do that. We haven't had to do that yet, but what you'd have to do is just send me or Dale a note and tell us your school system and what you're wanting to do, and we have to go back in and manually get the people that are running the computer side of this to turn it back into a draft. So it takes a little bit of time. So, if you want to do this on August 18th, there's no chance. If you want to do it now, we can probably do that. But I would say we want to make sure that we're confident that, you're going to change what you're putting in before we go to that trouble. So that would just be what you just have to do, is just notify us and we'll try to work to turn it back into a draft.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that. Our next question is from Cynthia. She asks, how long will it take to obtain the EV buses and the charging units after order? So the charging unit question, I think was addressed, but if we could review that. And then also, what's the average time for the local utility to provide the proper infrastructure, especially in rural areas?
Westy, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take the approximate time. So I would say that we'd be probably looking at 6 months from the time of first contact to in service, between 6 months and a year. And the range would be, because of the availability of the transformer, would probably be your limitation. Now, if it's a small deployment, just a few buses, then it could be much faster, because you wouldn't need that pad mounted transformer, and overhead extensions can generally be done faster. But kind of what we've found is that the equipment from the bus supplier is as much of a lead time issue as the electric utility, or more. So generally service will be available before the equipment would be installed, the dispensers and the power boxes, as long as the utility was engaged early in the process.
So sounds like engaging the utility early is the theme of today's webinar. I appreciate that. Okay, Dave asks, do we know of any munis that are using their electric school buses as vehicle to building mobile power stations during extended power outages?
I'm going to.
I do not. Yeah, I do not know of anyone using vehicle to building yet. There's several vehicle to grid pilots, including Virginia and New York, with school buses. There may be others, but not aware of any vehicle to building yet. But this is becoming a more of a topic of discussion now with resiliency, because you may have the ability to do that once you have a sizable enough bus deployment in the area. So
very good. Stephen asks, what is the average range of an electric school bus?
From what I've seen, and again, Westy, please feel free to correct me, but what I've seen from the different vendors, it's usually around 120, 130, 110, 140 miles. Assuming fairly consistent terrain, standard loads. It will vary, though, like we said, depending on how much stop and go you have, because that enables more regenerative braking. Going up a hill will take more power. Coming down it, you can create power and recharge the battery. So there's a lot of variables that have to be considered. Westy?
Yeah, I was actually just looking at the specs on the one of the buses, and of course it's going to vary by manufacturer, but 135, which is exactly what you quoted, was the one that I was looking at, and so I think you have to look at your routes, and I think, if I remember correctly, the routes are maybe about half of that on average, maybe less than that on average. So it just kind of depends on your routing, but you typically have enough that you would be able to handle that route, either both routes, morning and afternoon, on one charge, or between the two sessions, you'd have the ability to potentially add to add to that range with charging. So, but that's the range I've seen.
Very good. Thank you. And we have one more question. I think we have time to squeeze it in. Susan asks, can you please tell us more about the vehicle to grid in Virginia? How many sessions, how much money to schools from that?
Yeah, I can't give you any direct details. We actually have a group that runs that out of Virginia, and we could probably provide some more details on that. It's really just getting started. It's been we've just done our first injection into the grid as a proof of concept. A lot of it becomes around, in this case in Virginia, we actually funded the school bus purchases. Or an infrastructure. So in a partnership with the school, there was a mix there. So that was where the financial offset was in the infrastructure and the buses themselves as a partnership. But I think at some point there's going to be an opportunity, by energy unit costs on, amount that's been injected into the grid, or just a capital cost partnership to help that reduce the cost of the overall project. Would be the different opportunities, but can't give you any direct cost at this point.
Okay, appreciate that. And then one last question. This is, I promise, this is the last one. Who is manufacturing electric school buses?
I know of Bluebird, Thomas, Aaron, IC, and I believe Lion also.
And BYD is also, but
BYD. Okay.
for the Southeast, the primary ones are the same ones that you generally are purchasing your school buses from. So if where you're purchasing your buses is probably the manufacturer you've been dealing with is probably more than likely producing them.
Very good. All right, well, thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. I'd like to thank again our presenters, Dale Aspey, Westmoreland, and Alan Powell answering some questions for us from the EPA. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Kate Tracy, Kyle James, and Patrick King, who are helping behind the scenes with facilitating with the questions and with running the Zoom smoothly. I also would invite you to stay connected with us by joining our network. We publish several reports. So sign in, stay connected with us with our monthly newsletter, and be on the lookout for the email that will provide you with the links to today's recording and to the slides. And with that, I will wish you all a wonderful day. Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.